Hi, and welcome to The Upside. I'm your host, Paul Santinello. This is the show where we talk about all the good things that are going on in the town of Longmeadow. With me today is my special guest. Well, they're all special, but so he's no more special than anybody else, is Peter Benton. Peter is a Longmeadow resident, and Peter has authored a book called Brownstone and Ivory. And the reason I'm having Peter come in is, first of all, he's local, and that's a great thing, that he's from the town of Longmeadow. And we're going to talk about Peter's book. And I've known Peter; he's very active in our community and gives back a lot. So we want to afford Peter this opportunity to talk about Brownstone and Ivory and how he came up with this idea and how his background totally prepared him for this venture. Right? Welcome to the show, Pete.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay. So first thing we're going to let people know is that Peter is the backdrop to being an author now is that you're highly qualified CPA. That goes hand in hand with being an author.
Absolutely, it sure does.
So first question out of the box is, before we start talking about Brownstone and Ivory, is that what got you into writing?
Well, I've been writing all my life. I mean, I didn't really get into it. I've had a talent for writing. When I went to college, I majored in accounting, but I had a minor in English. All my electives were in English, and I've written, I've done a lot of business writing. I've done a lot of business articles and things of that nature. And I've written short stories before and done a lot of creative writing throughout my entire life. And what really got me writing the book, or this is actually the second novel I've written, but the first one I published, was a college professor of mine to whom I give credit. I was selected to represent my class in the inauguration of Anthony Caprio for president of Western New England College. And the professor was Michael Maripol, and he came up to me and he said, "So how many books have you written?" I had him for economics. Mm-hmm. And when I told him I hadn't written any books, he sort of gave me the, "What for?" He said, "Well, I've known you've had that talent. You should have written 10 by now." So he sort of gave me the jump start to get going.
Okay, excellent. So you just needed a kick in the pants to get going.
I had always had it in the back of my mind. You always, and a lot of times you want to do something in your life and you peg an age. And I had pegged an age, and it was just too far out, I guess. But as far as majoring in accounting, when I graduated from college in 1973, I had done research, and I was a business major, and that's where the jobs were. So, yeah. And I was, and it was during the Vietnam era, and things were a lot different. So it worked out.
Yeah, but you must get a lot of that, though. When you tell people you wrote a book and they say, "Well, you're a CPA."
Well, they think it's about accounting or taxes, and they don't they don't realize that there's a left side and a right side of your brain working, and sometimes I guess they're going like this. But a lot of people have other sides to them that flourish later on. I guess I never wanted to be a struggling writer. So I'm a struggling CPA.
Struggling CPA, that's okay, yeah. All right, so that leads us to Brownstone and Ivory. Interestingly enough, it's about, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you tell us about the story a little bit, because I've started reading the book, and I knew you were writing, because you and I had talked about this, and actually I bought my book at Longmeadow Days, and I had known that you had written a book, and you and I talked about your first novel, not this one.
Right.
And when I saw the book, I said, I got to buy it because I've known Peter, and I just want to see actually that you could write. And it's more than a few pages long, and it's not. It's really like tight print, so it's 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 not like the kind of book I would write.
Right. There's no pictures.
Right. So, but it's based here. It's based in Longmeadow, but under a different name.
Well, I don't know what inspired me to write the story, other than having an inherent knowledge of the area.
And let me go backwards. You grew up in East Longmeadow.
Yes, I did.
So we have the stories.
Well, I got older in East Longmeadow. I don't know as I grew up.
Okay. And you got really old in Longmeadow.
Well, for the last 32 years, yeah. And what happened is I came up with this concept. This, like I said, this is the second novel that I've written. And I don't know where it came from. I mean, it didn't come to me in a dream, and it just sort of, one day, I guess, I just sort of outlined an idea, and that was the idea. And as it turned out, it was very fertile ground, because anyone who's familiar with the history of Longmeadow and then East Longmeadow is aware that there were two villages. There was an East Village and a West Village. And so I started doing a lot of research for the book. And I knew that the two villages were very disparate, but I didn't understand or realize how much conflict there was. The West Village, of course, which was on Route 5, which is Longmeadow, was wealthy, business owners, attorneys, professionals. The East Village was agrarian, was farms and stone companies, because of the vast deposits of brownstone and redstone. And as a matter of fact, there are only 3 places in the world where you can get that Triassic sandstone that's called brownstone, that is the quality with which to put facades on buildings. It's not a structural stone like marble can be, like in the cathedrals in Europe and so forth. It is basically a facade, and it caught on around the Civil War, and people started in there, and hence the brownstone buildings. And the facades that you see, especially in New York, Chicago, and Boston. Well, there's only 3 places you can get that, and one was Longmeadow, Massachusetts, or East Longmeadow, whichever. The other one is Portland, Connecticut, and the other one is Passaic, New Jersey, or around Paterson. There's deposits of that brownstone. So as far as gleaning a story out of that, well, it sort of came to me that it would be interesting to take somebody from the East Village, which was much poorer than the West Village. The West Village were actually paying 2/3 of the taxes, and the East Village was using 2/3 of the taxes for schools and roads. They had a broader population. They had a transient workforce and so forth. But then, as I really started doing the research on it, and got deeper and deeper into it. I'm going to the chairman of the East Longmeadow Historical Commission, Bruce Moore. I was doing some research, and he said, we've got the transcripts, copies of the transcripts of the hearings that the state held when the town was trying to split, and so I got to look at those, and they're all hand typed, and they're just they're on a typewriter. And they have photocopies of them, and it was about that thick. And I spent one whole Sunday or Saturday, I guess it was a Sunday, yeah, in the East Longmeadow Library in their area, photocopying this. And when I got it, it was just incredible, but full of information. And the hearings, they were wild. The people from the East Village and the West Village, they were all considered one town, but they were just, they could not come together. And a large part of the conflict was that there was never a marriage between the two villages up to 1894 when they split. Okay. So there was no common denominator there.
Just like today.
Well, it's well, wait a minute. I married a girl from Longmeadow.
There you go.
Maybe I started it.
There you go. That's right.
See, I brought the towns together.
You brought the towns together.
So anyway, what happened is I'm reading these transcripts. I mean, people were arrested in the middle of the meetings. It was actually wild. And what eventually happened, is that they bickered and bickered and bickered, and they couldn't decide where the line of demarcation was going to be, where the boundaries of the two towns were going to be, and the state finally came in because they didn't divide towns that small. The state really didn't want to get involved, but they had to because there was so much conflict, and probably a lot of influence from the people on the West Village because they just didn't want to pay the taxes to support this side. The state came in on July 1st, 1894, and said, there's the line. And it's the line that exists right along where William Street starts and where Maple Street in East Longmeadow ends. And they just went, there you go, two towns. Now, what's interesting is they have a built-in vault in the town hall in East Longmeadow. Right. And if you look at the building, it's a brownstone building, and that was the town hall for Longmeadow.
Yep.
And the vault still says town of Longmeadow on it.
Well, I've reached out to Jack Villamano and Paul Federici and told them I want it back.
Well, that might be a project.
Yes, it might be a project.
I don't blame you.
It's ours, the rats. So, you know, it was funny because as I started reading the book, your description of the East Village, in my mind, I'm thinking like the Wild West, you know, maybe like a Nevada town with I'm thinking shanties and.
Well, it was the 1890s.
Yeah, and that's what I immediately thought of, you know, like a Clint Eastwood movie and that type of thing. And you're, you know, the separation of the two towns economically and socially and economically. I didn't realize that, and I know that it's, you know, intertwined into the novel, but you laid out a fairly vivid description of what it looked like back then, or what if you were traveling through that town or that village, what it would have looked like then. So we have two villages that were not getting along very well. And then from that, you created
That lays the groundwork, and that's kind of the background. If I had a canvas, I've
Yep.
now created my background. I put in a love story. I have a younger man who aspires to be a stonecutter like his father and grandfather, and I have a college-educated piano teacher she's actually 6 years older than he is, and they come together in a love story. And that takes a good part of part one of the book. Now, part two of the book, and without giving the book away, part two of the book shifts to Manhattan. And one of the protagonists, and there's a lot of conflict in between, because once this starts, this courting back and forth, obviously her father, who's very influential, is not pleased, and but interestingly, from the East Village, they accept her readily. So there's the social stigma right there. There's also another. The girl's father is a very complicated person. He's an old Yankee, but there's an old Yankee over on East Longmeadow side too, and they're two very different people, but their lives have crossed in the past, and it creates kind of a mystery there. There's a mystery that follows throughout. But something happens, and then the story shifts to Manhattan, and that's the second half of the book. So now you get into Manhattan in the 1890s, and when you get to that part, you'll see that the story changes. Now I'm talking about Manhattan. I did a lot of research in New York. I met the expert on brownstones, and he took me on a tour, and he's passed away since I wrote the book, but I went to a couple of his lectures. I belong to an old private library in New York. It's on 44th Street, but I did an awful lot of research in New York City Library, you know, the one with the lions in the front. I would live there if I had a chance.
Well, so did Abby Hoffman.
Yeah, I guess. I know Abby was long gone. It's too bad. But it was, so that's really where the story started. And it flows. And, you know, when I got into the 1890s and researching it, it was a fabulous time. I interjected a lot of history into, you know, from the research into the story and wove it into the plot. For example, the Duriers and their cars in Springfield, you know, and also a mention of the invention of basketball, and then when in Europe and traveling, there was some other things, and it was kind of fun to do that. I actually in both of well, there's three now. There's 3 novels I've written, and I learned a long time ago from creative writing and so forth. Although I never took a creative writing course, I learned a long time ago in writing and conferences that I've been to, because you know I've been doing this for 10 years, and that's, you know, writers' conferences in New York, talking with writers, and actually, you know, like Mary Higgins Clark and Malachi McCourt. I actually had conversations. I actually get to talk to these people, and start with the last chapter.
Okay.
Start with your ending. Then you have a beginning, and now it's like when you go on MapQuest. You have your beginning, you have your destination. How am I going to get there?
Yep.
And that's where you create the book.
Now, how long did it take you to write the book?
It took me a year to write this.
Okay. And from the time, like you said, you had your background on your canvas. Unfortunately, in painting, you don't get to go backwards and say, let me change that. And how much of your story changes as you're developing it?
Well, it's hard to say. Each of the three novels that I've written, this didn't change a whole lot. The ending changed. I had to change that a little bit, and that always happens because as you go along and the story develops and the plot develops, you have to kind of sometimes you got to tweak it. Major changes, not major overhauls. Maybe if anything. When I write, and this is just speaking for myself, when I write, I tend to write too much, so I end up having to go back and hack and kind of figure, I'm going to keep this, I'll put this in another book somewhere, that's a good idea,
Yeah.
but it doesn't, it's too much in here.
Yeah.
So really, you start with the whole thing, and then you just sort of, I kind of hone it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But, like editing this, I, with the publisher came back with the copy edited, when it was copy edited. And Word is fantastic today. I mean, you look at it, it's all copy edited, red line, bubbles, and all kinds of stuff. And they do a great job. It took me a week last summer to go through half of the manuscript after it was copy edited.
Okay.
So it took me a long time to do that.
Yeah.
And I pretty much left what I wanted to leave in, but it was good. It was very, 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 very solid. And there's really, grammatically, and nobody has found any, believe it or not, nobody's found any even spelling mistakes.
Okay.
So,
well, I don't know French.
The French is pretty basic, but because interesting you mentioned that is that the ethnic groups that kind of came into East Longmeadow to work on the stone, it was the Swedes and the French Canadians followed by the Italians. The Italians came in later, and that's why in East Longmeadow you find a lot of Italian families and a lot of French families still, and Swedes, and they are generationally, and I have met several people since I wrote the book who say, geez, my father worked, or my grandfather worked in the quarries, or he was one Italian fella said that his grandfather came over and was really a finisher, but they were masons in Italy, where they did. I mean, you go to Italy and you see what kind of stuff they have there, and they were finishers, and they really sculpted the stuff to fit the specifications of where it's going.
Yeah.
Made it more fancy, and that's really how it worked. Now this, if I could just talk about
Sure.
this a little bit. This is the cover of the book. This is a statue that's in East Longmeadow. It's on High Street, where the little red schoolhouse is.
Yep.
This was commissioned by a gentleman in East Longmeadow named McKnight, and it was done by a guy named Gregory Stone, who is a sculptor. And this was done about 20 years ago, I believe. And this is actually a piece of brownstone. And I went up there on one sunny day, and I took about 150 pictures of the thing. I did this myself, and I got this, and it was remarkable from the sun, from the way it was beating on it.
Yep.
This is actually called the Quarryman, and it's actually better from behind without the face. It leaves a little bit of mystery and intrigue in there. And if you see set in the back is a Steinway and Sons piano keyboard, and it says Steinway and Sons. Got permission from them, actually took that picture with my phone. It didn't need to be real clear, because it's inset, it's an inlay. And that became the cover of the book. So not only did I write the book, I designed the cover as well. I didn't put it together. That was done by a photo lab, and I had some help from the publisher who brushed it up a little bit and fixed it where it needed to be fixed. But that's the story of that statue. You can go and see that.
Yeah.
It's right down the
Did you
street.
put the little rock there?
That little rock was there.
Yeah, it wasn't a Bill Clinton moment on the beach of Normandy?
No.
I'm sorry, we're mixing politics and books. I'm sorry.
Let's not start doing
No,
that.
because Peter and I could talk about an hour and a half for politics.
Could.
And,
yes, we could. We'd agree on everything.
That's
probably.
right. So what was the most fun part of doing this? Because I love history. And I just can't imagine going back and looking at those. I'd be in the library like you would. I think I would live there trying to look at this stuff. But what was the most fun part for you? Finishing it?
Writing it.
Just writing it?
Just writing it. I mean, I would sit there, and people ask, where do you find time to write? There was it was an article done by on me in the Springfield Republican a few months ago, and she asked me, the author asked me, where do you find time to write? You've got an accounting practice, blah blah blah. Well, you know, from January to April, I work 7 days a week, a lot of hours. So from about June on, I take Tuesdays off, and I write on Tuesdays. And anytime I can, it's catch as catch can. Right now I'm kind of editing my first novel, getting that ready, and also, you know, doing some marketing of this, because you really got to get it out there. I've done a lot of speaking. I've done a lot of, from Vermont down to New York City. I've done, speaking, next month I'm speaking at the New York City Women's Book Club, which is, it's a lot of people. And
So do you wear a tweed jacket and have a pipe when you go to those things?
You know, my sister-in-law once said, she has a newsletter in New York, and she's helped me promote my book, and she said, you have to look authorish. And I said, what does that mean? Do I have to wear a jacket with suede on the elbows, a tweed jacket, just like you said, and smoke a pipe? She said, well, it would help.
It would help.
I said, no, forget it.
And maybe a little quirky hat and your glasses on the end of your nose.
You've known me long enough.
And that's why I can interrupt Peter and just bust his chops, because I've known Peter long enough. I just want to tell the folks how we met. One day I parked my car on Edgewood Avenue and went up to CVS, and as I come out of CVS, there's a briefcase on the mailbox that's still there in the corner of Edgewood Avenue, and I looked around and there's nobody there, just a briefcase on top of a mailbox. And I looked around, I waited about 5 minutes waiting for someone to come by because it looked important, and it was a briefcase. It wasn't a cheap one, to good taste. So I went home, opened it up, and there was I think you had a checkbook in there or something like that, something with your name on it, and Peter lived right down the street from me, and I didn't know that. And I looked up in the phone book, because we didn't have the computer then, so you had to actually look in the phone book, found Peter's number, and said, did you lose a briefcase, type of thing? And I drove it over to walked over to your house, whatever it was.
Knocked on the door.
And Peter thought I actually rummaged through, and had there been any money, we would have. But that's a different story.
Well, all the money was gone.
It was already gone. And Peter swears to this day that he was mailing something and forgot it, but there's a whole other story I'm sure we'll get down to.
I'm glad it was
That'll
just...
be yet novel number 3.
I know, I'm glad it was just my briefcase.
That's true. And since that time, which was over about 25 years ago, because I've been in Longmeadow 25 years, and
well, that was all of 25 years ago.
Yeah, and from that day, we've been friends and hung around in Rotary together for a while. We had a Longmeadow Rotary and that type of thing. And
no fistfights yet.
Not yet. No. And that's why I find it, because again, I knew you as an accountant. I didn't know you had this writing ability. So when you told me you were writing a book, I again, with the way we kid around, I'm just figured you were telling me that you were going to run for president. I'd need to get the same level of belief from me. But I'm truly impressed, because I love history. And as I was reading this, like I said, in my mind, I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm picturing what it looked like in East Longmeadow with immigrant families, and you know, the French Canadians coming down and working the quarries and so forth, and you know, the kids they were going to a recital, and you know, I could just picture that, you know, walking from their home to the theater or wherever it was in.
Well,
and
Court Square Theater. I mean, that was all part of the whole history, and the 1890s were a very exciting time. A lot of technological change. They were starting to put telephones in. They were starting to electrify things. It was just before the trolleys. They were just starting with the trolley concept, and it was technologically and socially and economically also. That was the start of Broadway. That's kind of intertwined in the story too, as you know. And it was just loaded. It was just fodder for a story. Just great.
So the other question I have is, how do you know when you're done writing the book?
You fall asleep and your face hits the desk, basically. No. When do you know when you're done? You know. I'll tell you the real truth. The only time you know when you're done is when the publisher, you get the final, and that's it. And then you know you can't change it. That's it. It's out there. They're selling it. That's the book.
So even while I was editing, were you trying to change it while they were editing it on you?
Oh yeah, I went through a lot of edits with that. Tons of edits. I mean, a lot of edits. I mean, changing things and fixing them. I wasn't disappointed by that, and it was kind of fun. I enjoyed honing it because I wanted it to be, it's my baby. I wanted it to be perfect as could be. I'm not going to be that bad, but I once read John Grisham quote where he said that he had a book that was he had his manuscript, and he said it was absolutely perfect. He said he had worked on this thing, scrubbed it, and he gave it to the publisher, and then 5,000 changes later, 5,000 corrections later, he got it back. So I didn't feel too bad because it's a tough thing to put that whole thing together and make it work.
Were the edits kind of, do they get personal? Some of the edits?
No.
No.
No, they don't get
No, I don't mean personal with you, but I mean, do you take it a little personal? Wait, I really like that. I want that in there. Do you fight over that?
No, because I could say yes or no. I had editorial privilege.
Okay.
And if I felt strongly about, and there were things that they suggested that I change, and I said no, that is very, very important to the story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to change that because that is a link, and even if it's a couple of words in a sentence or a phrase, that may be a link when you go. One of the most difficult things is consistency. When you're writing, you have to remember what you wrote. Yeah. When you're in chapter 14, you have to remember what you wrote in chapter 2 about somebody, and what they're like, and what they're doing, and and whatever foibles they have. You have to remember that, and you have to be consistent. You have to remember that. So you kind of have to keep a chart of who everybody is and what you wrote about them, and you have to constantly go back and read the book. I mean, I've read this book. I can't tell you how many times I've read it, but one of the things about writing is my reading habits. I've been asked a lot about my own reading habits. I read a lot, and I always have. I used to be a kid up in the bedroom at night under the covers with my transistor radio in one ear and my flashlight and a book reading on it. I'd get up in the morning and I'm like, and they wonder why I'm tired. But one of the things, I read a lot of history. And the novels that I read tend to be classics. I read classic literature.
Okay.
And that's but from time to time, like I went to Texas in May for a wedding. I bought a couple of novels off the shelf, authors that I knew, and I read them. And I try to avoid doing that because I sort of have my own style. Mm-hmm. And I'm not crazy about the novels that are out there anyway. I really don't.
Do you make them say that sucked? Mine's better. No.
I was thinking about it.
Yeah. You used to put you haven't put the stamps on them yet.
They're sitting there. I don't know. But that's what's really interesting is that the mainstream writers and the stuff that really sells is it's kind of a mixed bag. And one of the pieces of history that I really read about is the Revolutionary War, and that all of a sudden perked up about 10 years ago. Now there's books on the bestseller list, the 10 bestseller list, like New York Times bestseller list all the time. It seems like about Revolutionary War and our founding fathers and people like Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, mm-hmm. and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. They're constantly coming out. And that's a period that I'm going to set a story in because I know so much about the history of that. The 1890s, read a lot of history about that. Very, I wanted to be as factual as possible, but there's one other thing that I did that was a little hint from, also from Grisham. And he's pretty interesting. He's one that's out there that's, he's got kind of a cookie cutter approach to his stories, but he says the most interesting things. He started out self-publishing his own first book, and he had a garage full of them, and then he got picked up by, I don't know who he got picked up by. And he said he ended up with a garage full of books and for them to know where to go, and he said he used them for firewood or something like that. But he's an interesting guy, and he did say that that writing was a journey. I mean, it's a sometimes you want to be as close to fact as you can, but mm-hmm. sometimes you have to put a building where there isn't a building.
Yeah.
And I had to do that in a couple of places, but nobody's caught it yet. One of the other things I do that I've done with this book, and I've done with the other two that I've written as well, is for certain people I put little things in there, little messages that only 1 or 2 people will pick up on and say, hey, like names of people or something like that. That's just games I play.
Yeah, excellent.
It's fun to do.
So now you have a first novel that it hasn't been published, and you have another one that is completed or working on.
I'm working on that.
Okay.
Then I have a nonfiction story that I'm writing about my wife and I, and about how we sort of we have an autistic son, and we've sort of been pioneers with him growing up through the school system and dealing with that. It's because we started when he had his when he was diagnosed with autism, we didn't even know what that was, and neither did anybody else. Yeah. So 26 years later, he's 26 years old now, and we're still, every day is a battle. Every day is a battle because it's still in understanding it, dealing with it, and having, for example, access to different programs is still a problem. And it's with the avalanche of autistic people that are now aging out of school systems, it's becoming more and more and more of an issue that people really have to address in the providing service providers. So that's interesting. And I have a bunch of short stories I'm going to put into an anthology. So I've got a lot on my plate.
Okay. Excellent. So every Tuesday you take off to do write-in. When do you take off to do accountant? I'll talk to your clients about that one.
Every other day.
Do we have any more? Do we have a lot of time left? No, we're all done? Okay. That sucked. No. See, it's my show. I get to do whatever I want, but they did tell me when I got to go. Most importantly, how do people find this book?
It's available on Amazon. You can get it as a book, or you can get it as a Kindle. It's available.
Okay.
It's available on Barnes & Noble as a book or as a Nook.
Yeah.
So if you have apps on your smartphone, you can download it, or you can download it on your iPad or your computer, or you can get the good old hard copy here, and it's got my picture on it. I'm not going to tell you that because you'll just say something about the picture.
I already bit my tongue. All right, folks. Well, I just want to, Brownstone and Ivory, get it. I'm in the process. I'm still reading it. Like I said, I was just fast. I'm a history guy too, and so when you start talking about where I live, and it definitely has pulled me in. You can go to Amazon, as Peter said, Barnes & Noble, find it online.
Nobody's written a novel about this town or these two towns ever. This is the first one.
Excellent, and that's why I like it, because it's about our town.
It's called Massasoit.
Yeah.
I call the town Massasoit because that was the Indian name.
Yep.
And that's the name of the yearbook to high school.
So get it online. You won't regret it. And if you need it autographed, we can find Peter and have him autograph it.
Be happy to do that.
Right?
Be happy to do that.
Peter, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Folks, we'll see you next time on The Upside. Have a great day.